Link TV, connecting you to the world. Link TV is viewer supported. Watch more at linktv.org.
Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
Syria marks Freedom for Prisoners Day. Egyptians send final warning to the military as Tunisians demand a new revolution. And Jordanian police attack protesters demanding reforms. Mosaic World News from the Middle East begins now.
ونبقى مع أحداث هذه الجمعة التي اتسمت بحراك في أكثر من عاصمة عربية. ففي تونس فرقت قوات
This Friday, mobilizations were witnessed in a number of Arab capitals. In Tunisia, police dispersed demonstrators gathered in front of the government square in Al-Kasbah by force, preventing them from pitching protest tents. The police used tear gas, which spread across the site and reached the prayer hall at the mosque near the square. Tunisian activists called for today's protest online. They chose the square, which is near the government headquarters, in protest of what they consider a deviation of the revolution's path. They demanded the dismissal of the interior and justice ministers, the judiciary's full independence, and the prosecution of those responsible for the killing of protesters during the revolution.
وفي مصر طالب آلاف المحتجين في ميدان التحرير في القاهرة ضمن تظاهرة جمعة
In Egypt, thousands of people gathered in Cairo's Tahrir, or Liberation Square, for the Friday of Final Warning. They demanded that the authorities hasten the transfer of former President Hosni Mubarak to Tora Hospital and assign a court to prosecute the killers of the revolutionaries. They demanded that the members of the court be independent from the former judiciary and for the former president to be the court's first defendant. The political forces that participated in the protest confirmed that some of the most important demands include the dismissal of the current government and the formation of a national salvation government of technocrats. To review this Friday's mobilizations, we go to our correspondents. From Cairo's Tahrir Square, we are joined by Al Jazeera bureau chief Abdel Fattah Fayed, and from Tunisia, we are joined by our correspondent Mohammed Al-Bakali. Abdel Fattah, tell us the details of this Friday in Tahrir Square.
Yes, activists named today's protest the Friday of Final Warning. Some of the forces that have been holding a sit-in for almost 1 week in Tahrir Square are referring to this demonstration as the Friday of attaining the demands. The sit-in and protests have lasted for almost 1 week. Their aim is to attain the demands they believe the government has been either slow in meeting or has simply failed to meet, especially in relation to the killers of the revolutionaries and the prosecution of the former regime's figureheads. In addition, marches were launched from a number of provinces, including a march in the city of Alexandria toward the Directorate. Protesters removed the Directorate's flag and replaced it with the Egyptian flag, in objection to the new head of the Directorate. Also here in Tahrir Square, they are chanting in favour of replacing the General Prosecutor, purifying the judiciary and for justice. In addition, they have social demands that include setting a minimum wage.
Thank you, Abdel Fattah. We now go to Mohammed Al-Bakali in Tunisia. Mohammed, is it fair to say Tunisia's protest today was thwarted even before it began?
Yes, in reality, we can say the police managed to thwart the demonstration today. It is clear that the government decided that no more protests would be held in Al-Kasbah Square. It was clear for 2 reasons. First, the extreme readiness of security forces. Police deployed to the area had reinforcements, and protesters were prevented from reaching Al-Kasbah. Police heavily and freely used tear gas in order to disperse the demonstrators. Until now, some confrontations between protesters and police are still taking place on some side streets. The police are now trying to get demonstrators out of Al-Kasbah Mosque by using tear gas. The second indicator of the government's decision not to allow the Al-Kasbah protest was the Prime Minister's speech 2 days ago. He said secret forces are behind these mobilizations. Of course, when he talks about a conspiracy, it's obvious they will deal with the protest as a security issue. The youth of the revolution are promising to return once again. They say they will continue their protests. However, it seems a political decision was made not to allow the youth's return to Al-Kasbah.
Syrians held demonstrations in a number of cities on the Friday of Freedom for Prisoners. Syrian TV asserted that civilians and security forces were killed and wounded by gunmen. In addition, the American ambassador in Damascus warned of the possibility of the downfall of the regime by the Syrian street.
Just as every Friday since March 15th, when anti-government protests began in Syria, this Friday was given its own name. It was called the Friday of Freedom for Prisoners in order to honor political prisoners. The opposition's websites confirm they are still detained in Syrian prisons. This is yet another Friday during which people are killed and injured among both civilians and security forces, especially in the neighborhoods of Al-Kabun and Rukn-ud-Din in Damascus. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said 2 people were killed and dozens were injured by gunfire, while Syrian television announced that 1 civilian and 2 security forces were wounded by the gunfire of armed men. According to the opposition's websites, almost 150,000 people protested in Hama, while Syrian TV said the city witnessed a limited gathering, during which the participants demanded authorities combat corruption, adding that the rally ended without witnessing any security issues. Syrian state media Sana said civilians were killed by gunmen in Idlib. It said 2 members of the security forces were wounded by gunmen in Jubar, and 1 policeman was killed. In addition, it stated that 8 policemen were injured by gunmen in Al-Kharadiyya and Homs, where a number of neighborhoods witnessed protests. According to the Syrian Observatory, and as shown in images posted on the opposition's websites, protests swept across a number of cities, especially in Deir ez-Zur, where hundreds of thousands of people took to the street. Demonstrations also took place in Daraa, and according to the Human Rights Association of Syria, they led to casualties. Dozens protested in Amuda and Al-Hasaka province, while thousands gathered in Ain al-Arab of Aleppo. Dozens also rallied in Zabadani, Latakia, and a number of neighborhoods in Damascus, such as Al-Barza and Midan after Friday prayers.
إلى ذلك حذر السفير الأمريكي في دمشق روبرت فورد الذي كان زار حما.
Meanwhile, the American ambassador in Damascus, Robert Ford, who had visited Hama, warned that the street may topple the regime if it does not begin to reform immediately. He said he did not see any tangible sign on the ground that indicates that the Syrian government is ready to begin the reforms demanded by the protesters anytime soon. He called on President Bashar al-Assad to make the difficult decision, believing that Damascus should begin a real transitional period instead of settling for words and promises. In an interview with Foreign Policy magazine, Ford confirmed that he would not stop touring various parts of the country to meet with Syrians. This came as a response to the strong criticism he received from the Syrian regime after his visit to Hama. On the other hand, a movement that calls itself the Free Officers of Syria movement announced through its official spokesman Hossein Harmoush, a colonel who defected, that the movement decided to form its own leadership and demanded that the Syrian army determine its position on the regime.
نتابع هذه النشرة بالتطورات اليوم في يوم الجمعة في الأردن هذه المرة حيث اندلعت مواجهة.
Violent confrontations erupted between Jordanian security forces and protesters during a demonstration today. The protest was organized by popular and youth movements which named themselves the July 15th parties in Al-Nakil Ras Al-Ain Square in central Amman, the Jordanian capital. Jordanian police used batons to disperse hundreds of protesters who chanted, "The people want to reform the regime," when they tried to organize a march. The Muslim Brotherhood and its political wing, the Islamic Action Front Party, announced demonstrations today in all 12 provinces of the kingdom, demanding the dismantling of parliament and the dismissal of the government.
They took control and assaulted journalists. This is absolutely unacceptable. We will march with the required legal procedures against the attacks on journalists, each and every one of them.
Joining us is our BBC correspondent in the Jordanian capital Amman, Nasser al-Shadid, to brief us on the newest update on the developments there. Nasser, how's the atmosphere now in the capital after this tense day?
Now the demonstrators have withdrawn from Al Nakheel Square after saying there will be another rally in front of the Prime Minister's headquarters. They do not want any more clashes, especially after the security forces showed their power and tried to frighten the protesters. The forces had tear gas in their hands. Therefore, the protesters decided to withdraw from the place in fear that there may be more clashes, after what already took place after Friday prayers in front of Al Nakheel Square.
So now, are there intentions for other actions to take place, or has there been any announcement of intentions for other moves by this youth movement group called the July 15th Parties?
Well, every Friday there are efforts by political and popular groups and parties. Tomorrow there will be a sit-in in front of the Prime Minister's headquarters called for by the July 15th parties. What happened today angered journalists from this organisation, as well as independent media organisations, such as the Centre for Defending Freedom of Journalists. They said they would file lawsuits against the Public Security Directorate. They said that the Directorate used force against these protesters. A short moment ago, I talked to a member of the Journalists' Union. He told me that the Press Association Council will hold a meeting tomorrow morning to discuss what to do about what happened, especially since there was an agreement between the Security Directorate and journalists that they will not be subject to assault by the security. They were wearing special vests marked Press in Arabic and English. But what happened is that more than 15 journalists were injured, and some of them are now hospitalised.
The young Bahraini poetess, just released from jail but soon put under house arrest, says she has been tortured. Ayat al-Gharmazi was detained on March 30th for reciting in public a poem critical of the regime.
20-year-old Ayat al-Gharmazi, who has become a symbol of defiance against dictatorial rule, speaks of her ordeal in jail.
When they catch me, they bring me to the CID department, and they beat me, always beat me within 9 days. 9 days, at morning, at afternoon, at night. They beat me a lot. Men and women in same time, and more than one person beat me in same time.
Gharmazi's comments come against the backdrop of reports by human rights groups suggesting that the Saudi-backed crackdown on the anti-regime protesters in Bahrain continues despite a so-called national dialogue.
Human rights defenders with whom we spoke are wary that the dialogue is anything more than elaborate play acting for the international community's benefit.
A report by Human Rights First says the Al Khalifa regime continues to intimidate, torture, and detain human rights advocates and shoot at civilians. Human Rights Watch, meanwhile, says authorities have fired more than 2,000 workers from government jobs and firms linked to the state for participating in anti-regime protests. On Thursday, pro-regime elements mobbed an Irish fact-finding delegation in the capital, Manama. The group had traveled to Bahrain to investigate the conditions of scores of doctors and medical workers detained for opposition to the government and giving medical care to the protesters. Dozens of anti-regime protesters have been killed, hundreds more injured or arrested in the regime's heavy-handed response to the uprising. But despite the regime's use of brute force, the demonstrators are still on the streets demanding an end to the authoritarian rule of the Al Khalifa family, and they have made it clear that neither intimidation nor reconciliation can stop them.
Now, before moving right along, we have late breaking news as you see right on your screen. Center for Bahrain Human Rights says a protester has been killed by regime forces. This is a female protester killed in the city of Sitra. And of course, this is with the ongoing protests going as people are trying to get removal of the Al Khalifa regime in Bahrain. And of course, we'll bring you the latest on that story as it develops right here on Press TV. Now, staying with Bahrain, Saudi-backed regime forces have attacked anti-regime protesters near the capital of Manama. The protesters in the town of Nuwaydirat have been out shouting slogans against the regime. They call for the downfall of Al Khalifa ruling family. The weekly rally, called by the largest opposition group Al Wafaq, is ongoing in the Bilad Al Qadim area near the capital, Manama. Thousands of people there are calling for justice and equality in the Persian Gulf Sheikhdom. Elsewhere in Bahrain, anti-regime protesters have been attacked by the regime forces in the island of Sitra. Anti-regime protesters also took to the streets in other towns and villages around Manama. Meanwhile, the country's top cleric has said that political reform is a religious demand. Sheikh Isa Qasim also said that religion and politics should not be separate. He slammed the government for trying to transmute the popular revolution into a sectarian divide. The cleric made the remarks during his Friday prayer sermon.
Yemeni anti-regime protesters keep pouring onto the streets to vent their anger over what they call foreign interference in their country's affairs. The demonstrators have rallied in the capital Sana'a and other cities, including Taiz, Aden and Saada. They also demanded the trial of embattled Ali Abdullah Saleh along with his regime officials. Yemen's tribal chief Sheikh Sadiq Al-Ahmar has urged all Yemenis and political parties to unite. He has called on the Republican Guard and essential security members to join the revolution. His remarks come as at least 10 people, including 4 civilians, have been killed and nearly 40 injured in continuing clashes between tribesmen and pro-regime forces in Taiz.
قال وزير الخارجية الإيطالي فرانكو فراتيني أن مجموعة الاتصال الدولية
Italian Foreign Minister Franco Frattini said that the International Contact Group on Libya will recognize the National Transitional Council as the representative of the Libyan people. During the contact group's meeting in Istanbul, Frattini told reporters that the international recognition for the council leaves no choice for the Libyan president but to step down. He added that the UN Secretary General's special envoy to Tripoli, Abdullah al-Khatib, will lay down conditions including a ceasefire for Gaddafi to step down in the framework of the political offer. He indicated that the negotiation team will determine whether Gaddafi would be allowed to stay in Libya or leave the country.
Confidential mediations or
5 months after protests broke out in Libya and 4 months since the foreign intervention began, there's still no sign of any breakthrough in the situation. Colonel Muammar al-Gaddafi supporters took to the streets in the town of Ajalat, west of Tripoli, in a massive demonstration, the largest of its kind so far, to support Gaddafi and reject foreign interference. In response to their goodwill, Gaddafi said in an audio recording without appearing in public that he will redeem them with his life and he will fight on until the end.
My loyal people cannot be separated from me. I will stay with the people with my rifle until my very last drop of blood. We will conquer this campaign of injustice, the campaign of colonization, the campaign of hatred, a campaign of hatred. This is a campaign of tyrannical tyranny. They imposed on us a battle inside our homes. They killed our children in our homes. They killed children. They killed women.
القذافي توعد حلف شمال الأطلس والغرب. Denouncing the French president, Nicolas Sarkozy, who is leading the battle against Libya, Gaddafi threatened NATO and the West that the end of NATO and the EU will come in this battle. Russian envoy Mikhail Margalov claimed the Libyan prime minister said the government will destroy Tripoli if the revolutionaries took control of it. The Libyan government spokesman denied the statement. The spokesman accused the West of launching a war against his country for oil and reiterated the government's determination to defend this wealth until the last drop of blood.
We will do everything. We will do everything in our power to defend our land and our oil. We will use anything and we will kill anyone who approaches our oil, be them rebels or NATO. It doesn't matter to us. We will defend our oil until our last breath.
In light of these threats, the opposition spoke of Gaddafi forces shelling Ajdabiya, killing one person and wounding several others. Meanwhile, the opposition forces are massing in the village of Al-Khawalish, preparing to advance east towards the town of Al-Qarian, which is located on a key road to the highway leading to the capital. To strengthen their alliance, a meeting between the Western powers and Arab countries was convened in Istanbul with participation from representatives of the opposition. The meeting is the fourth of its kind since the contact group on Libya was formed, with boycotts from China and Russia, which accuse NATO of misusing the UN resolution in the war on Libya. They fear that the war is heading to a future in which Gaddafi holds on to authority and that the West's intentions are questionable.
Tensions continue to flare up along the southern border today. A Palestinian-fired mortar shell exploded in an open field in the Eshkol Regional Council. This following Israeli airstrikes overnight against Hamas targets in the Gaza Strip. IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Benny Gantz convened a meeting today to discuss the heightened rocket attacks emanating from Gaza. The group agreed on steps to be taken in the event of a future escalation. 6 Qassam rockets were fired yesterday from the coastal enclave into the western Negev. Air Force jets struck Hamas smuggling tunnels in the Gaza Strip near the Egyptian border. Hamas officials claim that Israeli warplanes also hit 4 training camps, and 2 Palestinians were reportedly injured in those attacks. The United States has flatly rejected a decision by the Arab League to ask the United Nations to recognize a Palestinian state along the pre-1967 lines with its capital as East Jerusalem. The Arab League announced its decision after its meeting in Doha yesterday. The U.S. has repeatedly said that such a move by the Palestinians is counterproductive and undermines the peace process. Speaking to Chabad emissaries in Tel Aviv last night, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu insisted that such unilateral steps would not bring peace any closer, and if the Palestinians wanted a resolution to the conflict, they would return to the negotiating table without preconditions. All this follows the Middle East Quartet meeting in Washington this week, in which the parties failed to release a unified statement on the peace process. The quartet met again yesterday in an attempt to reach an agreement on how to restart negotiations.
We continue to discuss with our partners, ways to get the parties back to the negotiating table. Ways to, as we cited, there are still gaps between them, and we're again continuing the conversation about how to close those gaps.
Some 1,500 Israeli and Palestinian activists gathered outside Jerusalem's Old City this afternoon to show their support for a Palestinian state. The group marched from the Jaffa Gate to the East Jerusalem neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah, where they held a solidarity rally. Police were deployed in force to monitor the event, which passed without incident.
Actually, we are here today in an historical march together, Palestinians and Israelis. I evaluate we have now already 2,500 people here marching in support of the Palestinian Declaration of Independence.
Joining me now from our Tel Aviv studio to discuss the recent political and regional developments is Middle East analyst Dr. Raanan Geesing. Good evening, Dr. Geesing.
Good evening, Ariel, to you and to all our worldwide viewers.
Thanks so much. Let's start with the Prime Minister's refusal to sign on to this measure that would authorize the probes of left-wing organizations. In your opinion, could this be an attempt by the Prime Minister to perhaps soften his rhetoric as the quartet mulls over this PA-UN bid and other ways to restart negotiations?
Well, there's no doubt that there's a slippery slope here. There are things that should not be legislated and should be handled by the political game in a democracy. I think this is one of them. There's so many things that are at stake here, and it's so easy to slip into practices that could undermine democracy that it's better to give this to the public to decide. Not just the public in general, but let's say NGOs who could pick up the issue and fight for it, and then create a natural majority at which the political parties could respond to. That's my suggestion of how to handle these things. You can't legislate everything.
So on a bit of a separate topic, the Arab League has officially accepted the Palestinian quest for unilateral statehood, and they've said that they accept this based on the 1960 lines with East Jerusalem as the capital. And as you know, Washington has rebuked this move, and obviously Israel has too. Does the Arab bloc at the UN, in your opinion, have the clout needed specifically to push Western countries to sway a potential vote at the UN?
In the past it did, but now the times have changed. We're talking about the Arab Spring and the disintegration not only of regimes around us in Syria and Libya, but also the disintegration of the Arab League as a forum that can enforce decisions.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows, and more at linktv.org/mosaic.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs which connect you to the world.